So, we had euphoria, the church looked like it had united. It's like we had crossed the Red Sea. But like the Israelites of Exodus, we started to grumble. Change wasn't happening quick enough. The money still wasn't in the bank. Same bus, different driver. All the things that we soaked ourselves in. The church divided itself. Election season came, we polarized along political lines as a church. And I confess that I put my hope in man rather than the creator of man. I put my hope in social media and news instead of the word that has no fake news. And if I'm a microcosm of the church, Lord forgive me, no wonder the church gets the government it deserves. So like 2008 and 2013, we had strayed. We strayed very quickly from our first love. We looked to the world's money, and we took out the pointing finger, an abomination to God, at each other, within the church, at government, at anybody we could point fingers at. Instead of the church invading the world crept back into the church after a short time of euphoria. 2018 election came. We prayed God's will to be done. Did we? Divided us even more because it was disputed. Then came violence, shootings, disputed court rulings, and then more recently, more violence. And it's just all it's done is polarize us even more. Now we've had a recent collapse of our economy, whether we set records, this country. I think we're the only country that's had 2 hyperinflation events in 1 decade. But that's where we are now. And this has cemented in us a deep despair of the system. A system a worldly system that carries no hope at the end of the day. So I ask myself, are these just cycles of governance? Or are we destined to be a suffering nation forever? But I say to you, not if the church has its say. It's up to us. You see, reading from 2 Chronicles 7:14, that famous passage that we talk about all the time, when my people, who are called by my name, the Christians, humble themselves and pray, turn from their wicked ways. And he says, I'll hear from heaven, forgive your sins and heal your land. But we see that as the only turning point, by the way, for a healing of a nation. Orchestrated by God's people. But if you go on from that passage, verses 19 to 22 warn us of the present catastrophe we're in today. We've turned, and then it says, but if you and your descendants abandon me and disobey the decrees and commands I've given you, and if you serve other gods, I will uproot the people from the land and make it an object of mockery and ridicule among the nations. And the Lord will answer, verse 22, because the people abandoned the Lord and worshipped other gods and bowed down to them, that is why God has brought catastrophe on the land. Can you see the obedience of 2 Chronicles 7:14 and then the consequence of disobedience thereafter? And if God gives us another chance, and I pray that He will because He's a gracious God, I pray that we will press the reset button. And I pray that we would never slip away from Him again as a church. more than 2,600 years ago, Habakkuk asked many of the same questions that we ask today. Chapter 1, verse 2. How long, O Lord, must I call for help? But you do not listen. Violence is everywhere. I cry, but you do not come to save. Must I forever see these evil deeds? Why must I watch all this misery? Wherever I look, I see destruction and violence. I'm surrounded by people who love to argue and to fight. The laws become paralyzed and there's no justice in the courts. The wicked far outnumber the righteous, so that justice has become perverted. Those were the words of Habakkuk. But can we, like Habakkuk, the church of today, can we boldly, and we should do, ask God, what on earth is going on? You see, it's hard to love someone, even the creator of the universe, if we're holding grudges and hiding our true feelings. Habakkuk, he clearly loved God, but it didn't keep him from respectfully challenging God with a request to help him to understand the gap between his love for God and what he saw around him. We all love God, right? But it doesn't add up with what we see around us. And so we need to wrestle this question. So Habakkuk finishes his rant, but he's mature enough to know that the only way to get an answer was to wait. To wait and listen. In chapter 2 he writes, I will climb up to my watchtower and stand by my guard post. There I'll wait and see what the Lord says and how he will answer my complaint. Can we be patient enough to wait and see what the Lord's saying? Or will you be patient enough to seek his face and not try and get him to do what we want? Habakkuk, actually, if you read on, actually didn't get the answer he wanted. The Babylonians were coming. It was not what he expected. And after he questioned God, and God responded by telling him he was going to use the wicked Babylonians to destroy Israel, Habakkuk, like all of us, would have been trembled. He said, I trembled inside when I heard this. My lips quivered with fear. My legs gave way beneath me, and I shook in terror. But I will wait quietly for the coming day when disaster will strike the people who invaded us. Habakkuk 3:16. Surely, he's saying, it can't get worse. You see, Habakkuk offers us an amazing model of a healthy, balanced response to probably what is the worst news you want going to ever hear. The worst answer he could have received from God. Even as his body reacted, he realized he had a choice about what he was going to believe. Facebook and Twitter and news, or could he just trust God? And knowing that God could somehow bring good out of a very bad scenario. You know, I feel that kind of desperation nearly daily. But what about the poor? What about the poor? They're the casualties of the fall of man. They're the casualties of events that are going around us. And so we ask about the poor, because that's why Foundations for Farming exists. To make a plan for the poor, because they are so close to God's heart, the poor. When he looks down on Africa, he doesn't look at the wealthy and the governments and politicians, he looks at the poor. He gets to the root of what the problems are. And so we must make a choice. And I found that I had to make a choice because it is so easy to hate. It actually feels good to hate especially when you feel that you are being the target. And the violence and the horror that this country has experienced regurgitates in me that desire to hate. We call it righteous vengeance. But God has a different way. We had the privilege of training a poor community in here, and wafting over the walls over there was tear gas. There was rifle shots in the distance, but we carried on. God says, don't get weary of doing good, no matter what's happening over the wall. And so, if we as a nation or as a continent profess to be 80% Christian, we've got to ask ourselves, why are Christian brothers beating each other to a pulp? For me, the answer is, perhaps we're just churchgoers and not Christ followers. I humbly answer this question, not in an arrogant, finger-pointing way, because I am part of the wicked problem myself. But in this organization here, when we have trainings, we have seen firsthand the state of the church. People coming in here professing to be Christians, they do all the lovely hand-waving and praising God, and then we hear later they go home and they get involved in witchcraft, sorcery, church on Sunday, witch doctor on Monday. And yet, we say we're Christian because we go to church on Sunday. We hear stories from people coming in here of their pastors who are more concerned about their own welfare than that of their flock. We had a little girl come in one day and she said, asked one of our trainers it was a genuine question. She says, why does my pastor ask me on Sundays to pray for him to get a new car when I'm only eating one meal a day? Can you see that is the state of our church, of people who profess to be Christians? And again, I'm sorry, I'm trying to be honest and truthful with what I see, but I'm not trying to pontificate or point a finger. You know, I navigate a horrendous journey here every morning to work. I get driven off the road by combis that emblazoned on the side are Jesus saves, and this is Jesus' chariot, and all these lovely Jesus things, and yet they will spend the entire journey trying to get me off the road. Where is our fear of God? How can we put things on vehicles when we don't do it? I see titled men of God arriving at this facility, and when we show them our humble accommodations, it's not good enough. And they demand a single room for one man and a bathroom en suite, and he squeezes his congregation, 5 men, into another room without a bathroom. Is this the servant leadership that Jesus would have us talk about? I speak, as I say, humbly about this because I'm part of the problem. The church is part of the problem. Where are our servant leaders? Men and women who are prepared to take up their cross daily. You know, Jesus said there's only 2 conditions to follow him. One is to deny yourself and take up your cross daily and follow him. He's almost saying, if you're not prepared to do that, don't come on this journey with me. Rather not come. Can we be men or women like Habakkuk, who instead of saying, what if, and grumbling and complaining to one another and pointing fingers at others, if Habakkuk, instead of what if, he says, even if the fig trees have no blossoms, and there are no grapes on the vines, even though the olive crop fails, and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the field, and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will praise the Lord. Those are the kind of men and women that God will respond to in an instant. Habakkuk wrestled his questions, but he embraced the reality of the time. Trusted always and found hope in God, not a worldly system. You see, Habakkuk's name means to wrestle and to embrace at the same time. Where are the men and women with the Habakkuk type of faith to wrestle, as he does in chapter 1, to wait, as he does in chapter 2, and then to say, even if, in chapter 3, if God doesn't give him the answer that he wants. And in our situation, I think that God is waiting for us. He's waiting for us with a plea, a 2 Chronicles 7:14 plea, when my people. You see, there's a transaction here in that verse. See, our job is to humble ourselves, and his job is to heal the land. We seem to get it the wrong way around. We try to heal the land in our worldly way and our worldly understanding. And believe me, if we keep doing that, he'll do our job, and that's to humble us. Perhaps that's where we are today. We're being humbled. You see, God is looking for a humble church, not an entitled church. Seeking his face, not with religion and ritual. Confessing and repenting daily our wicked ways. Primarily that is an indifference to the poor. Do you know, if you read in Ezekiel 16, when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, one of the great wickednesses they didn't help the poor. That was one of the reasons he destroyed them. We are full of disunity. We have idols. We are syncretists. 1 foot in the church, 1 foot in ancestral worship. How can God bless a church like that? He is dying to reach down and heal this land. But it starts with us. Starts perhaps with us in this room today. A remnant. So if God would be gracious enough for us to reset the button back to 2008 and then again in 2017, I pray that we would never turn back to our selfish idolatry and wicked ways as a church. You see, can this unselfishness that we talk about, the unselfishness of Christ, can that be the character of a nation? Can you imagine if people looked at Zimbabwe and said, wow, what an unselfish nation? But it can only start with us, the church, and then it might percolate to those in authority. It won't happen the other way. You can't legislate unselfishness. Unselfishness comes from the heart of God. And who does he use on this earth? He uses his people, his church. We need to stop making a plan. Zimbabweans are famous. We make a plan. Maybe we should let God make a plan. Stop our arrogance. Surely it's plain to see that man's plan has failed and will continue to fail, because we need to remember that we do not war against flesh and blood. but against principalities and powers in the heavens. And we need to remember that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but have divine power to demolish strongholds in the heavens, because that's where our problem is. You see, the genius of God is his simplicity, and he has a simple plan. We need to follow his plan. We need to firstly appropriate the character of Christ. His humility. His humility to come down from the splendor of heaven to be an amoeba in the cesspool that we call planet Earth. His unselfishness. Walked this earth completely unselfish unto death. And then, of course, his faithfulness. Only did what his Father told him to do unto death. If we had those three characteristics inculcated into the people of Zimbabwe, we wouldn't need a government. Humility, unselfishness, and faithfulness. And with that, with his character, we would carry his heart. And where does his heart lie? His heart lies primarily with the poor. When he announced his ministry, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. I've been anointed to teach the good news to who? The poor, the brokenhearted. Matthew 25, when he's going to separate us sheep from goats, the criteria for being a sheep or a goat is that you did to the least of my brothers. He's almost saying, if you didn't have a heart for the poor, then perhaps you didn't know me. In this tent, perhaps God is looking for the righteous men and women that Abraham pleaded with God on their behalf to rescue a nation. Can we be the catalyst? Can we be the remnant that sets this going? Our theme this year is I was hungry to give. Because giving is the antidote to the terminal disease of selfishness. Can we undertake this conference as an antidote, as a remnant? A people who will remove the pointing finger, blaming government and whoever else we want to blame. A people who will take the plank from our own eyes and do our job so that he can do his job. Can we forgive and serve like the Daniels and the Josephs of the Old Testament, who just served and served and served until they gained enough influence and favor to rescue their own nation? It's the church. Pointing fingers, pontificating is not God's way. In our present circumstances, Jesus would have us replace a curse with a blessing. Pray and even bless our government. Even, no matter what they do. Because God appoints them. We've got to understand, Romans 13 leaves that no room for speculation. God appoints governments. And we try to unappoint them man's way. Let's leave God to his job. Jesus says emphatically, and it's written in red in my Bible, so I have to say it. It doesn't make sense to me because it says, Jesus says in Matthew 5:38, he says, it is no longer an eye for an eye. We're very eye for an eye-ish in this country. What they've done to me, I want to do back to them. Do not resist the one who is evil. It doesn't make sense. How can you reward the one who is evil? God says no. I have a different way. My way is different to yours. My thoughts are not your thoughts. And because it's written and read in my Bible, I'm going to try and do that as much as I can. Because it leaves no room for speculation, and it's unconditional. Suffice to say, the pointing finger, we read about it in Isaiah 58 verse 9, is abhorrent to God. It's got us nowhere. When you criticize someone continually, all it does is close his heart. And he points back at you. Pointing fingers and accusing also makes you look self-righteous. Jesus has a different way. I believe that when we forgive on ground level here, God wins a battle in the heavens that we might not even see or know this side of eternity. You see, when we point fingers and are accusing, we're stepping into the devil's playground, because he is the accuser of the brethren. Jesus, on the other hand, is the Prince of Peace, where he says the meek shall inherit the earth. You see, when Jesus talked about accusations and judgment, in John 1, I think it's verse 17, he says, I judge with truth and with grace. So we've got to hold on to the truth, right? But if we just press the truth without any grace, that is just nothing more than judgment. On the other hand, if we're just all grace but we've hied away from the truth, that's pandering to evil. So there's a tension between truth and grace. Jesus got it right. Can we try and learn that? Not possible all the time, but we can try and learn that. You see, the world says we must demand our rights. Jesus has a different way, because vengeance is his. No matter how persecuted and trampled we feel, he says continually, and without any room for speculation, and unconditionally, he says unconditionally forgive, culminating at the cross. Some people, we just don't, we need to really grasp the unconditionality of forgiveness. The only condition I see is when Jesus says it himself after the Lord's Prayer, when he says, if you don't forgive others, I won't forgive you. And I think that's why he gives us, as humans, a blanket statement, forgive everybody, because we can't see into their hearts. So to be on the safe side, just forgive everybody. Not just the people who come to you and say, I'm sorry, because we don't know whether they're really sorry or not. Jesus does. This unconditional forgiveness that Jesus commands is best summed up by two heroes of the faith. 60 years ago this year, Martin Luther King Jr. said these words when he was preaching a message on loving enemies. He said, I would rather die than hate you. Grace and truth. And then I think, well, I must try by God's grace alone to emulate and live the immortal words of C.S. Lewis. To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable. The next few days you're going to hear powerful stories of this antidote to selfishness. Stories of giving. Giving generously, materially. Giving and living sacrificially. Giving in order to give, not in order to receive. Jamie is even going to speak of giving unto death. Sacrificing life. And so, you've come here for 3 days. I'd love to just exhort you that Jesus is wanting more than 3 days of your life. He's wanting the rest of your life. Whether you've been following him for decades, or whether you're a new believer, he is saying to you today, I was hungry, and you gave. Because when you give to the least of our brothers, you are giving to Jesus. Isn't that a beautiful feeling? You're actually feeding Jesus. He's asking us to sacrifice, to be living sacrifices for the rest of our lives. He's asking us to be bold and overtly Christian, not just when it's politically correct. In Zimbabwe, we are blessed. We can be overtly Christian in any place we can. I know some of you coming from the first world find that difficult. So there's even legislation against it. But in Africa here, we can be overtly Christian in every conversation. Because we must not conform to the standards of this world. So that, by the blood of the Lamb and the power of our testimony, and unto death, we put boots on our faith and help the helpless. Because at the end of the day, my brothers and sisters, love always wins. Love always wins. Lou has had a song put on her heart a few months ago. It's a beautiful love song to God, but I think it's very pertinent to Zimbabwe today and where we are at. And with our theme, I was hungry to give. So I'm going to ask her to come up and just sing it solo. What I'd like you to do is while she's singing it and you meditate on the words, just grab the hand of the person next to you. Don't need to stand, you don't need to, just a time between you and God. Where am I going to go after these 3 days? What am I going to do in my country, in my sphere of influence, no matter where I'm at? What, Lord, would you have me do at this time? Brian's always said to me that when we're in a dilemma, he says to God, his prayer to God is, God, what are you doing? And if God answers or not, he carries on and he said, well, anyway, what would you have me do about it? What would you have me do? Meditate this time. And I like to do it at the beginning of the conference, not at the end, because we've got 3 days to let this percolate into our systems. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? As God's chosen vessel in a very, very broken planet. Thank you, Lou.